Oh, to see the sun rise, that all the earth would bear its warmth. Oh, to see the sun rise, that all the people would walk in its light. Oh, to see the sun rise, that the trees would bloom and bear fruit. Oh, to see the sun rise, to know that a new day has begun. On this mountain, Chapter 2. It's a disturbing experience, waking up and not knowing where you are. But this time, unlike the last, I awoke knowing exactly where I was. I felt the same friction of the bed sheets, the weight of the quilts, and the crackle of a fireplace. But there was one difference. No Quimby. The rocking chair was lonely. I sat up, feet dangling off the edge of the bed. The warm rays of the sun peeked through the window. I must have slept through the night. So much for dinner. Seeing that my bandages were secure and clean, I limped my way over to the door. Then it hit me. I just said those words out loud. I spoke again. So much for dinner. I recognized my own voice. When you have nothing else, recognizing your own voice is comforting. I opened the door, and there I was, in a hall of many rooms amongst the annex of a roof. The hall was not populated, but I heard voices down the stairs. I held the railing and hobbled my way down, another unpopulated hallway of many rooms. I heard now the sound of clinking dishes and shuffling footsteps down the next flight of stairs. I clambered down. There at the threshold, I peered into the large expanse of a dining hall. Rough-cut tables filled the space, many of which had people sitting at them. An enormous hearth on the other end of the hall was ablaze, filling the room with dancing firelight. I stepped into the hall, and my eyes caught sight of a silver-haired man working behind a broad counter space. Quimby. I limped over and sat on one of the stools at the bar. His back was turned. He was drying a couple of glasses with a worn rag. I spoke softly. "Does this place serve breakfast?" Quimby turned on his heels. "Why, yes it does." His eyes widened. "Good mercy above! You're awake! And talking?" I grinned. "It seems so." He smiled, but then quickly went stern as he peeked over the counter. "You're keeping weight off that ankle, aren't you? I wouldn't want your sprain to get any worse." I nodded. "How about your memory? Anything yet?" I felt my face get heavy. Quimby spoke up. "Well, maybe some breakfast will lift your spirits. You must be famished after sleeping through dinner last night. Stay put, and I'll be out in a minute with something to eat." Quimby slipped away into the chaos that was the kitchen. I looked at a very well-ordered shelf space, full of all kinds of malts, beers, ciders, and wines. At the very top was a carved sign hung by a single nail reading Tiller's Tavern. Looking behind me, I could see people coming in and out. Some dropped off various groceries, others left plates behind from an early breakfast. Looking at the fireplace, I could see it had to be at least 4 times the size of the one in my room. Numerous caribou antlers hung from the wall around the hearth, and above the head of the fireplace was a decorative sword. Just then, I realized no one had taken notice of me. No one sat down next to me, and no one introduced themselves to me. Good, I thought. I'd have nothing to say anyway, not even my name. A plate of food slid into view in front of me. "Nothing like pancakes and sausage with some warm cider to start your morning, eh?" I looked up from the plate at Quimby, who seemed genuinely happy. I gave a subtle smile. "Thank you, Quimby." He leaned against the counter toward me. "Listen, you're having a hard time, as would anyone in your shoes. But you have a roof over your head and food on your plate. Let's worry about today before we worry about tomorrow. Get yourself fed, and then we'll talk about today and all its concerns. Fair?" I wanted to be angry, but his tone was too sincere. I nodded. "Yes, that's fair." I ate my breakfast, which was unbelievably good. The hall began to slowly empty as people went about their daily business. Quimby came to take my plate. "I have someone you need to meet. He should be here soon. Feel free to relax." I grabbed my cup of foaming cider and made my way over to the great hearth. My eyes were drawn to the decorative sword that was hanging over the flames. The sword looked ancient. The metal of the sheath was faded and oxidized, the crossguard was broken on one side, and the leather around the hilt was so worn that the shimmer of the tang peeked through multiple places. I jumped at the sound of a voice behind me. "It's an old one for sure." I spun around and saw a tower of a man. He stretched out his hand, which was covered by a leather glove. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Constable Hewitt." I shook his hand. "Not a problem." He quickly took control of the conversation. "Are you the young man that Quimby told me about? The one who was found yesterday, injured, having no memory?" "Yes, you found him." His imposing figure turned and sat in a chair by the fire. The studs of his leather armor glimmered in the firelight. The sword sheath at his side pushed awkwardly against the chair. I took a seat as well. He continued, "I'm commissioned with keeping the peace here in the town of Haven, and you've seemed to gotten yourself into a less than peaceful situation. Now I know Quimby said you've lost your memory, but do you happen to remember anything at all?" My mind searched desperately. "No, sir," I said sheepishly. "I don't remember anything." "Well, find me the second you remember," Hewitt said. "I need to be sure we're not facing another threat to our town. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," I said. Quimby walked over with another cup of hot cider outstretched to the constable. "Well, Constable, you made it, and you found our little mystery case." Hewitt's hand met his eyebrows in frustration. "Yes, a mystery case indeed. A young man left injured and half dead at the eastern gate. No memory and no name. No clear cultural affiliations. No belongings. Truly odd." I felt a small panic rush over me. "How odd, if I may ask?" Hewitt sipped his drink and then spoke. "Young man, I'm not sure you understand how odd this is, but we're 4 days away from any other town. The land around us is harsh and unforgiving. People don't just show up at our gates empty-handed, let alone at our eastern gate. That gate faces the mountain range. There's nothing out there. No one lives there." "Well, someone does," said Quimby with a smirk. Hewitt looked angry. "That's irrelevant, Quimby. Kooky suspicion at best." Quimby took my empty cup of cider. "That may be, good Sir Hugh, but you and I both know that there are mysterious things out there that, well, we can't explain." Hewitt growled. "Well, I'm more interested in what I actually know, and I know that this young man must not be alone. There has to be someone else out there who brought him here, or someone who was traveling with him and maybe betrayed him or something, or we could be facing a threat of marauders like last year." Quimby nodded. "I understand you have a job, Hewitt. I will watch over the young man if that is what you would like." "Yes," he said, and turned to me. "I am asking, as the constable of this town, that you stay under Quimby's care for the time being. Being that you have no memory, you're not needing to rush off anywhere, and your physical condition won't lend you to rough travel. So it seems, well, you're stuck with us for a time." Quimby put his hand on my shoulder. "Welcome to Haven." Familiar scenes are important. Places we know and the spaces we live in, despite how nice they are, can feel like home simply because we've been there before. So, there I was in the most familiar place I could manage. Logs crackled in my sight, a chilling breeze slipped through the open window, and the quilt around my shoulders itched. I felt like a pendulum in the old rugged rocking chair. Quimby had wanted to show me around town, but I couldn't fathom stepping outside. I felt more and more panic rush over me. Why did I lie? I whispered to myself. Hewitt had asked me if I remembered anything, and I said nothing. But I remember something, or rather, someone. Why would I not talk about her? I whispered. I knew that I had remembered her face last night, but now all I could remember was the feeling of her presence. It hung like a dull weight in the center of my chest. Her memory had brought me weeping last night, but now it only brought me this dullness. The evening sun began to set behind the trees. I stood and closed the window. A gentle knock rattled at my door. A moment later it opened, and standing at the threshold was a woman. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I don't mean to bother, but I brought you something." Her delicate hands held out a basket of baked treats. I froze for just a moment. She was a young woman. Her curly brown hair lay gentle on her shoulders. She had a full smile. She spoke again. "Quimby told me you don't know your name, but I will tell you mine." She handed me the basket. "I'm Alenia." I realized when I went to grab the basket, I was still clutching the quilt around my shoulders. It looked like a plaid poncho. I quickly cast it aside and set the basket of treats on my bed and faced her. The smell of flowers filled the room. I spoke. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she interrupted. "I feel there are some things, though, that I need to tell you. Can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded. She took a seat in the rocking chair. I sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were folded, and she twiddled with her thumbs. "I've been a part of Haven for quite some time now. I left my war-torn home from up north and traveled down here. I was happy to find that Haven really lived up to its name. It's one of the few places that's still good in this world. Quimby took me in, and he's become like a father to me. You're probably wondering why I'm saying all this, but it's relevant to you. You see, I've come to find out that in Haven, nothing happens by accident. And so, take this with sobriety, but I think you belong here." I shook my head in frustration. "I appreciate the sentiment, but right now it feels like I belong nowhere." Alenia leaned forward. "Quimby says to make home wherever you are, not just where you want to be. Otherwise, you'll never be home, but you'll always want to be home somewhere else." I stood up angrily. "And how would I go about doing that?" I shouted. "I don't know a bloody thing." Alenia stood up. "I'm just trying to help," she said. My inward panic grew into anger. "What good, then, are baked treats? Are they going to bring my memories back? Are they going to heal my wounds? Are they going to help me find myself again? How are you helping?" I expected her to cry or yell, but rather she remained silent, staring deeply into my eyes. Her eyes were a shimmering crystal green, and it seemed to pierce my soul. I felt exposed. My anger quickly ceased, and the dull weight in my chest returned. I slumped back onto the bed. "I'm sorry," I croaked, holding back tears. She didn't say anything. I looked up and saw that her back was turned. She was kneeling down at the fireplace. She spoke gently. "It's okay, Edmund." I felt the wind fly out of my lungs, and I stood with a start. What? What did you say?" She turned to me and smiled. "Edmund, that's your name." She wasn't wrong. It was my name. The second it rang out in my ears, it was all too familiar. I was reeling. I stood over her as she knelt by the fire. But how? Do you know me? How do you know my name?" She got up and looked directly at me. Her small frame only stood to the height of my chin, yet her stare was chilling. "I've lived a lot of my life by instinct, Edmund. I don't know why, but when I looked at you, I just knew that was your name. In the same way that I know you belong here. Nothing happens by accident, Edmund. No, I don't know you, but I know my gut. Sure, you don't remember anything, but now you have a name, a roof over your head, a full stomach, and people who care about you. I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds like home." In my fear of the unknown, I didn't want to accept what she was saying, but I couldn't help but be charmed by her disposition. And most of all, she knew my name. I couldn't help but smile. "Let's start over then," I said. "Let me introduce myself." I reached out my hand. I'm Edmund." Her full smile returned, and she shook my hand. "Alenia," she said. "It's a pleasure to meet—" We were interrupted by the crashing sound of a ringing bell. Alenia's kind disposition turned to horror in an instant. The ringing didn't stop. The tavern was filled with shouts and shuffling chairs. I could hear people shouting outside on the street, despite the window being closed. "What is that?" I said. She looked terrified. When the bell rings and doesn't stop, it only means one thing." Just then, Quimby burst through the door, disheveled and out of breath. We're under attack. Quickly, follow me." All three of us sprinted down the stairs to the main hall. I felt my ankle protest in pain as I began to abuse it. The dining hall was cluttered with tipped chairs and left behind belongings. I could hear panicked voices outside and the unmistakable voice of Constable Hewitt barking orders. Quimby pulled us behind the kitchen counter. "Listen," he said gruffly. "You both are not in a position to be fighting. Stay here. Barricade yourselves in." Quimby death-gripped my shoulder. "If they break through the west gate, this is one of the first places they will try and ransack. You must protect Alenia. Do you understand?" I looked at Alenia, who was surprisingly composed. My eyes met Quimby's. "Yes, I will." Quimby took off down the hall and out the door, grabbing a leather-sheathed sword that he threw around his waist. Without another word, Alenia and I began to frantically barricade the windows and doors. We finished by putting 2 large tables against the main door. We stepped back, looking at our work, catching our breath. Alenia reached over and grabbed my hand. "It's going to be okay," I said. My eyes were drawn to the great hearth, still ablaze. I let go of her hand and walked over. The old sword shimmered in the flame light. I wrapped my hand around the hilt and lifted the sword from the hearth. It felt natural. The noise of chaos grew louder outside. I joined Alenia, who was composed earlier but now looked full of dread. I wanted to be afraid. I wanted to feel an absolute sense of panic like earlier, but rather, I felt emboldened. Something, deep down inside me, told me that I was home.